Both Airbus and Boeing have significant operations in China right now, but given recent geopolitical events, could this actually be about to change? And also, could that create more trouble for Airbus than for Boeing for a change?
Beijing's goals for its aerospace industry is to dominate the global space and drive its competitors out of business.
Stay tuned. During the last few months, we have seen some really interesting news come out from China regarding the shape of its aviation industry. For example, in September of 2022, the COMAC 919 finally got its type certification from China's aviation authority after quite a few delays. And very soon after the certification, China Eastern Airlines took delivery of the very first C919, early back in December of 2022. But as I've explained in previous videos, this first version of the C919 is actually using quite a lot of foreign parts in it, ranging from avionics, hydraulics, landing gear, and of course its engines, which are a variant of the CFM LEAP engine, which is used in both the Airbus A320neo and the 737 MAX families. Until recently, most analysts didn't expect China to develop its own engines for the C919, at least before the end of this decade, but some recent development seems to suggest that China's engines might be much closer than that. In March this year, the Air Current reported that a test version of the Chinese CG-1000 Alpha engine that aims to replace the LEAP has actually been tested in flight using a Yankee 20 military cargo aircraft. And by the way, it also seems that China might have brought to service a new version of that Yankee 20 cargo aircraft with yet another Chinese-made engine on top of that. That one is a different and much more powerful engine than the one that would be used on the C919, and all of this suggests that Chinese engine development is accelerating even faster than expected. Now, building their own engines is the single biggest step that China has taken towards creating their own fully homegrown C919, but it still leaves all of the other foreign parts who are still left in that aircraft. Building and certifying new parts to replace those will likely take much more time, but that will depend in part on whether or not China wants to actually sell the C919 to foreign markets or not. Now, the reason I'm bringing up the C919 is because its progress has an effect on how well Airbus and Boeing will fare in China during the coming years. But even if its Chinese engines are ready earlier than expected, the C919 will not be in a position to allow China to fully replace Boeing and Airbus, or even one of them actually, as analysts like Liam News have explained in their excellent articles on the subject, which you can check out in the description. The reason that they can't is that China simply needs too many single-aisle jets during this and the next decade for it to completely turn away from Western aircraft manufacturers. They just cannot churn out enough aircraft themselves to do that, and the way that the C919's long-awaited delivery has gone seems to actually verify this. The first C919 was delivered to its operator on the second week of December 2022, like I mentioned before. But as of right now, COMAC still hasn't delivered a second aircraft, and more to the point, this first aircraft appears to have made maybe a few flights in January and February, possibly even with passengers in some of them. We don't really know that, but as of right now, this aircraft seems to be sitting in storage. And if that's the case, then knowing how Airbus and Boeing are actually doing in China becomes much more interesting. But for the last few years, this has been a very one-sided affair. Boeing hasn't recorded any new sales to airlines in China for quite some time now, and deliveries of already purchased jets have almost stopped completely, with the exception being wide-body freighters, mainly the 777F. But in some better news for Boeing, up to 11 airlines in China are now said to be restarting operations with the 737 MAX, and because of that, some analysts are actually expecting Boeing to finally start delivering some of its already built 737 MAXes for its Chinese customers. Airbus, on the other hand, scored a huge sale of nearly 300 jets to China last summer. Usually, Chinese operators would balance large orders like that between Boeing and Airbus, but this time Boeing clearly didn't expect any matching order because they immediately expressed their frustration, saying that geopolitical differences continue to constrain US aircraft exports. But it is in aircraft production where things between Boeing and Airbus are now starting to get really interesting. Because and it's actually not often that I've been able to say this lately, some recent developments might actually be swinging the balance back towards Boeing, and I'll explain why after this. I sometimes wonder why I get sudden urges to undress and crawl into a hot room, hit myself with birch tree branches, and then run out into the cold snow and roll around. And thanks to today's sponsor, MyHeritage, I finally found out. They provide the world's leading platform for discovering ethnic origins and building family trees using DNA research. It started with them sending me this nifty little kit with instructions, and after a quick cheek swab, I then sent it back to them to await results. And lo and behold, I am Swedish! Well, that wasn't maybe the biggest surprise, but it turns out that I'm also 16.6% Finnish, which I didn't have a clue about, and now that whole sauna craze makes much more sense. It was really cool to be able to see who I matched up with from their database with millions of people, fill in my family tree, and to see that I apparently also have some relatives in the US. And don't worry, they take privacy really seriously, so you don't need to worry about your results ending up in the wrong hands. So if you would like to know more about your ethnic origin, your family history, or just want to give a really unique gift to someone who has everything, well then click on the link here below and use the code Mentour. That will give you free shipping of the kit and 30 days free use of MyHeritage services. Now, let's continue the video. Now, both Boeing and Airbus have been struggling with supplier-related shortages lately. Despite their plans to produce as many as 75 single-aisle aircraft per month by the middle of the decade, Airbus actually delivered fewer aircraft than Boeing did in the first 3 months of 2023. But everyone expects that these supply chain issues will gradually start to ease, which should once again give the edge back to Airbus, well, at least initially. To be very clear here, both Boeing and Airbus are keen to increase their aircraft production, but as things stand right now, Airbus has more assembly lines for its A320s than Boeing does for their Maxes. On the other hand though, Airbus really needs these assembly lines because, in a way, the European manufacturer has now become a victim of their own success, and this is why. For any airline, placing a new aircraft order is something that they will have to plan many years ahead. Now, there is nothing really new in this. Obviously, aircraft are complicated machines with millions of parts, many of which, like the engines for example, are long lead time components, meaning that they take a long time to produce. But sometimes, waiting times for new jets can go up even further than the time it takes to actually produce them. And that's especially true when a manufacturer introduces a new type, causing the airlines to scramble to get those new, more efficient jets into their fleets. So, since Boeing and Airbus both introduced re-engined versions of the 737 and the Airbus A320 more or less at the same time, this exact thing happened. And huge queues of prospective customers were created, causing the waiting times to get much longer. But waiting times for the Airbus A320neos are at the moment considerably longer than for the 737 Maxes, and that's simply put because Airbus has been outselling Boeing. Right now, Airbus has a backlog of over 6,000 A320neo family aircraft, and the backlog for the 737 Maxes sits at just around 4,200 jets. So, if you're an airline and you want to place orders for brand new A320s today, you likely won't be able to get them delivered before the end of this decade. And that's especially true if you want something special, like the longer range A321XLR, since that's more complicated and time consuming to make. Now, as you might expect, these super long delivery times are now actually starting to cost Airbus some sales. Airlines that are on the fence a little bit about which aircraft type they want to order might well pick the 737 MAX simply because the Boeing can deliver them years earlier than Airbus can. And this is the real reason why Airbus really wants to push monthly production rates up as high as possible. But interestingly, Boeing seems keen to chase Airbus as best as they possibly can. Currently, Boeing makes around 31 737s per month, but are pushing their suppliers to increase this rate to 42 per month by the end of 2023, 47 by the middle of 2024, and 52 737 Maxes per month by January 2025. In order to make this possible, Boeing are increasing the number of production lines that they have for the 737 MAX. At the moment, Boeing have 3 737 assembly lines at their Renton production facility, but for a while now, only 2 of these lines have actually been active. According to the Air Current, each of these lines are theoretically capable of producing 21 737s per month, so they could easily handle 52 aircraft. But to ease some constraints and unpredictable bottlenecks, Boeing are opening a 4th line in Everett, a site that up until now have been used to produce wide bodies. So what is Airbus doing to boost its production of the A320 then? Because they are the ones with the real problem here. Well, this is where we get back to China. Right now, Airbus has a total of 9 final assembly lines for the A320 family. 2 of these are in France, 4 are in Germany, 2 in Alabama in the United States, and 1 in Tianjin in China. But in April, Airbus announced that they're opening a second A320 final assembly line in their Chinese plant, while at the same time boosting the existing line's capacity from 4 to 6 aircraft per month. And at the same time as this is happening in China and in the US, both Airbus and Boeing are also being pressured by India, who really wants one, or better yet both of them, to set up aircraft assembly lines there as well. And there might well be some very good market-related reasons why both of these manufacturers would want to consider that. According to the United Nations, India are set to overtake China as the country with the largest population in only a few years. And in the post-pandemic environment, the country's aviation industry is experiencing an unprecedented boom. We all got a pretty good clue about what this could mean when in February, the newly privatized Air India made the biggest aircraft order in history for nearly 500 single and twin-aisle jets from both Airbus and Boeing. And that huge number doesn't even include the likely big number of aircraft, mainly Airbuses, that will also come from lessors, again because of the lack of Airbus delivery slots. And that's not even the end of it, because Indigo, which is currently India's largest airline and already has orders for 500 aircraft from Airbus, is reportedly in talks with both Airbus and Boeing for 500 more. And the fact that they are even talking with Boeing is pretty amazing in itself, because Indigo is currently an all-Airbus airline, and changing that will come with its own challenges. Again, there is a huge possibility that these talks could have to do with Indigo's wishes for more quick deliveries than what Airbus can currently handle. But there could also be other reasons. Indigo might, for example, also be looking into buying wide bodies as it's expanding its long-haul operations. What all of this means is that both Airbus and Boeing have very good reasons to try and keep their customers in India very happy. But does this mean that they could actually consider setting up production facilities there? Well, here things start to be a little bit more complicated. Airbus already has an aircraft assembly line in India for military turboprops. They're assembling 40 C-295 cargo aircraft there, following a couple of orders from India's military and Coast Guard. And they also have more production and maintenance facilities already available in the country. Boeing, on the other hand, in March announced that they will be setting up a conversion facility in India to turn passenger-carrying 737s into freighters. And what makes this really interesting is that up until now, Boeing has been making these freighter conversions in China. Boeing are also doing other things in India, including recruiting engineers and building aerostructures for 2 helicopter types, the Apache and the Chinook. Crucially, these plants produce structural parts for helicopters that Boeing sells worldwide, including inside of the United States. But what about airliner production then? Well, with China's pursuit of manufacturing independence, plus worsening international relations, many analysts expect a gradual withdrawal of key Western industries from China. And India seems quite keen to play a role there beyond the needs of its own expanding market. But it is very hard to imagine Airbus pulling out of China anytime soon. The opening of that second A320 final assembly line, plus some recent statements from the French president, seem to suggest that Airbus remains committed to its partnerships in China. Obviously, Airbus needs every production line in its disposal for the reason that I mentioned earlier, if they are to try to have any chance of hitting their production targets for this decade and beyond. And by the way, there's also a possibility that somewhere in the back of Airbus's mind, they're thinking that there might be a need for A321neo factory-built freighters in the future. This is a long story in itself, with a lot of question marks that probably deserves its own video, but if that were to happen, it would only add to the production demands for the A320neo family. So could Boeing have a chance here then? could they move into India, increasing their production capacity? Well, here we are facing a completely different problem. You see, Boeing has a lot of aircraft parts made in different sites around the world. That's why they have the Dreamlifters, those enormous 747 conversions to transport wings and fuselage components between sites in Italy, Japan and the United States. But Boeing doesn't assemble any aircraft outside of the United States. But then again, this might already be about to change, well, at least sort of, because in 2021, Boeing announced their plans to assemble the new Mk-28 Ghost Bat, better known as the Loyal Wingman, in a facility at the beautifully named city of Toowoomba in Australia.
It's the first time that Boeing is setting up this type of facility outside of North America.
But this is likely just a singular exception to the rule, because Boeing is currently developing this aircraft in cooperation with Australia's military, who are funding much of the project. It would be much harder for Boeing to convince its unions that there is a need to open a final assembly line for an already existing aircraft at a site outside of the United States, especially now. Remember, Boeing has just stopped production of the 747, creating a giant empty space where its assembly line used to be. And Boeing also moved all production of the 787 away from that same plant. They are using some of that space to check 787s and the rest of it for the new 737 line that I mentioned before. The only way that I could see that Boeing could possibly be able to convince its unions to agree to a move abroad is if they were to launch a new aircraft type to be made at home very soon. But as you've seen in my previous videos, that sadly doesn't seem very likely. The questionable upside here for Boeing is that from now on they probably have less to lose if international politics makes business with China even more difficult. After the Chinese balloon overflew the United States this January, the US threatened to sanction Chinese aviation companies that were believed to have played a role in the incident. This obviously didn't do Boeing any favors in China, especially since they were hoping to restart MAX deliveries at the same time. But the stakes for Airbus, if these sanctions get any worse and if China starts to become more isolated, could obviously be much higher, since they are already committed to their production lines in China. In the short term, Airbus definitely looks like it will have the larger production capacity out of the two manufacturers, but that doesn't mean that its production will also remain more stable than Boeing's, which, I admit, it's a strange thing to say after Boeing's production troubles during the past few years. What we will ultimately have to wait to find out is which of these two manufacturers will actually be able to up their game in India the fastest, or if they even will do that. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Check out this video next or binge on this playlist. And if you want to support the work that we do here on the channel, then consider buying some merchandise or maybe sending a super thanks or join my fabulous Patreon crew. All of the links are available in the description. Have an absolutely fantastic day and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.